Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Oklahoma Hall of Fame and Gaylord Pickens Museum virtual artist talk with Oklahoma artist Sunni Mercer. We are so excited to have you all here today. Sunni has some great content for us, and we can't wait to hear more from her. I want to remind everyone that the last day to visit the exhibit is August 21st. You can join us for an in-person reception with artist Sunni Mercer and her fellow artists in this show, Jessica Bethany, on Thursday, August 5th from 5 to 7 p.m. All right, Sunni Mercer is an NEA Regional Fellow with experience in the area of communications, interpretive art, and design. Her artwork is archived at the Smithsonian Institution, and she is certified with the National Park Service in interpretive planning. Sunni is the former director of the Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition. She also served as the director of the Oklahoma City National Memorial Center, overseeing the design phase of the museum. She coordinated staff, volunteers, and worked with the National Park Service design team, family members, survivors, and rescue workers to develop an exhibit design approved by a very large Oklahoma City constituency. She taught art history at the University of Central Oklahoma for 12 years and has been a visiting lecturer and presenter at numerous universities, businesses, and conferences, including the American Association of Museums National Conference. Sunni has extensive experience in the area of community and multi-interest collaborative projects and was selected for the National Endowment for the Arts, Artists and Communities America Creates for the Millennium National Registry. Among her noted community collaborations is The Living Room, a 3-year project with the Wichita Art Museum. The Allegiance Credit Union features an interpretive garden Sunni designed in honor of employees lost during the Alfred Murrah federal building bombing in Oklahoma City. Sunni has received numerous awards and grants, including a national award for interpretive design for her design of the Federal Employees Credit Union Remembrance Garden. Sunni's sculptures, interpretive design, and installation work have been the subject of over 100 articles. She organized the collaborative project, The Measure of My Strength, to create awareness and support for women dealing with the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Swaziland, Africa. The resulting exhibit and book of the same title includes her sculptures, poetry, and stories of the women in Swaziland. This work is now held in permanent collection by Southern Nazarene University. In addition to her studio, Sunni owns Mercer Associates, Inc. Established in 2001, Mercer Associates is a consulting business specializing in interpretive and strategic planning for museums and exhibits. Sunni served as the interpretive planner during the conceptual design phase of the Cherokee History Museum, and she designed the Chickasaw Nation Historic Capitol Museum and Council House exhibits. Sunni is currently consulting with Chickasaw Nation's Department of Culture and Humanities. She is also contracted as the interpretive planner writer for the Arkansas Museum of African American Heritage at Mosaic Templars in Little Rock, Arkansas. Sunni Mercer resides in Bethany, Oklahoma with her husband, Gary. They have 2 children, Josh and Danica, and 4 grandchildren. Sunni, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, and good morning. And I need to make one little correction. We have recently had a 5th grandbaby, so
congratulations.
Thank you for that. I am an assemblage artist, and I like to consider my work sight poetry. I play with language in my work, and I use surreal juxtaposition. In other words, I put odd things together to create and provoke thought. Each series, and I do work in series, are chapters for me, and I see them as a book. Each series being a new variation on a single story. Now, I don't believe that what happens in my studio is in a vacuum. And as a matter of fact, the process itself is not sufficient for me. I really believe and have come to believe over the years that I have to work outside of my comfort zone. It is essential to my process. I believe that making art is enriched by the precarious dance of uncertainty. So I embrace it. And most of the time I'm working way outside of what I feel comfortable with. My first visit outside my comfort zone was with the Metal series. I constructed 240 small objects for my thesis, my master's thesis, and then 350 1 year later for my first New York exhibit with O.K. Harris. Each object is constructed to represent the hidden things that are in each of us. They are the things that make us unique. Maybe there are scars or our unique characters. When presented in a mass, like people, they all look the same. But as you get closer to them, they begin to reveal their secrets. And this was my first step into actual assemblage. Over the years, I've also made boxes, and I see my boxes as secret holders. For instance, memories. You see a box, I envision a box with all these pictures of ancient ancestors and old stories. Holding on to our memories are like having to hold on to a fish with a gold thread. That's a way of interpreting that. Promises captured by a broken heart, or an ephemeral music box secured by memento mori, childhood secrets that are unspoken over the years, all are part of what I do when I make boxes as container vessels. I did go through a period where I worked with mixed media paintings, and honestly, I started my art degrees in painting and moved from painting to sculpture. I kept putting things into my paintings, and it was somewhat exasperating to my mentors who said, you need to make up your mind. I never really made up my mind. And halfway through my work with assemblage sculpture, I started to move back into painting a little bit to see what I could push, how I could push the connection. And these were my first steps in actually moving into the combination of painting and sculpting my work together. You'll see in this one, the bottle caps. One of the first times I used bottle caps in this way. I also really toy with the idea of ephemeral. As an artist, it's hard to create something that's ephemeral, but I think we can allude to it. And years ago, we had migrations of monarchs that went across Oklahoma. They were amazing. And my daughter and I would go out. We lived outside of the city, and we would go out. They would light on the ground these monarch butterflies, and they would die there. And so we harvested them, baskets and baskets of them. And for years I used them, and I've actually embedded their wings in my work as a form or symbol of the beauty and brevity of life. A temporary Veneta, which was done in the early Dutch paintings as a reference to the transience of life, the ephemeral part of life. I decided over time, again, I see my work as circular and not linear, and I decided that I wanted to move into larger scale projects. And to do this, I knew that I would need to have a team, because I knew that it was not something I would do by myself. And so I took on a project that was bigger than myself, and Tagray Heartland was the first of these types of projects. This involved a collaboration with a wonderful documentary filmmaker out of the University of North Texas, Melinda Levin. And we worked together to compare and contrast the homeless in both rural areas like Northwest Oklahoma and New York City. And what we did is I made these larger than life hearts and put them inside of materials that we literally took out of an indigenous hovel in Northwest Oklahoma, and created these conversations. And of course, the shoes, I had a wonderful assistant in my studio who helped me make these hundreds of shoes where we cut the heels off, and they represent uselessness. And so there's this contrast between having and not having, and this idea of what it means to be homeless from two very distinct perspectives. Now, ironically, I had mentioned earlier that my work is circular, and I want to say that I have been so inspired by this story of Tagray that I have written a novel. And I'm proud to say that that novel, entitled Tig, is actually going to be released this fall. It's being published and going to be released this fall. So there's a story that I wrote based on this man. So again, creative effort just moves into it. The inspiration continues to circle around. I was commissioned for an installation for a new gallery in Wichita, the Wichita Art Museum. They were building a wonderful gallery as an annex to their museum. that it was attached to the museum. It was going to be for their community. They wanted to find a way to draw the community into the space. And so I was asked to work on that with them and to actually be the premier artist to create an exhibit. And so the name of the room, they named the room the living room. And I thought, what a wonderful play on words. So I went and solicited major agencies across the Wichita area that help support that community, that help make that community more livable, more comfortable. And I used those agencies with their representatives, and together we created a series of furniture pieces that actually are representative of they represent the symbolism of the actual organization. And so then we created a room, and the educational director for the museum did all these wonderful interactive areas around it so that people could come in and experience a living room. We all have times in our life where things change, where we have a major pivotal change in our life that impacts who we are. That happened to me within days of the Oklahoma City bombing. I was asked to design a logo for a charitable organization, and I was placed as a result of that on the mayor's task force and sent to California to study and review with others, a team, public commemorative art. At that point, I was asked also to put together a small exhibit for the Murrah garage. Now, this exhibit was a closed exhibit. It was used for the people that were going to be competing to design the garden part of the memorial. And so my co-chair on that volunteer committee and I designed and built this experimental exhibit with several volunteers from the memorial task force. Oklahoma City received thousands of origami cranes after the bombing. And I was taken by that because they are an art form. And they represent Sadako, a young girl who had a vision that if 1,000 golden cranes could be made and folded, she would be healed of the cancer that she suffered as a result of Hiroshima bombing. And so people related that story somehow to Oklahoma City, and so thousands of cranes arrived. I thought it was important to remember that. I thought the beauty of that story and that prayer for healing was necessary. And so I took those cranes and I made this part of the garage exhibit to honor the rescuers that would sleep on those cots while they searched for those that had been lost in the bombing. After the Murrah exhibit and before my appointment as the Oklahoma City National Memorial Center Director, I was commissioned to create a memorial for the Federal Credit Union. They were going to build a building that was separate from the federal building, and they wanted a garden of their own. So I created a garden that was part of an outdoor room. It had several different areas, and what you see here is the main fountain, which symbolically weeps over actual pieces of granite taken from the Murrah building that are inscribed with the names of those who were lost out of the credit union. During the opening of this garden, an interpretive aspect of this that I felt was so important, we gave every visitor a little bag that had 2 pieces of tumbled glass. The glass also had come from the Murrah building, and we tumbled it to remove the rough edges. They received 2 pieces. One piece was for them to take home, and the other piece was for them to cast into the fountain as a frozen tear. So it allowed people to publicly not only memorialize, but go through a grieving process. I served as director for the Oklahoma City National Memorial Center during the time that it was being designed. And when the design went to fabrication, I resigned and started my own business with Mercer Associates. I began to assemble teams to support larger, more commercial projects. And this one is a university lobby that serves as a recognition hall where people can come and use the computers and learn about historical data related to the people and the events of the university. I've also been commissioned over the years to design public art, which I love. And I, again, usually bring teams together. I designed a specific mosaic medallion to commemorate a 100-year anniversary. I worked with the owner to contract a local mosaic artist, an architect, and a builder, and together we combined to bring this design to fruition. This is made with smalty tesserae from Italy. It's absolutely beautiful, and the mosaic artist did an incredible job to represent my design. The Measure of My Strength was the most recent collaborative work I've done. It involved two photographers, former students of mine from UCO, Bridget and Eric Pipkin. They joined me together in Swaziland, Africa, and we interviewed and documented many women and grandmothers, particularly older women, their stories and how they are handling the extreme epidemic of HIV/AIDS. Using our research, we came back. I created a series of figurative sculptures. This was the first time I actually used assemblage art to create figurative work. And what's fascinating is, as a painter, I was doing figurative abstract figures. But this was three-dimensional, and I wanted them to be children because they were going to be the children that told the stories of these women. These figurative pieces each had a specific part of the story of these women in Africa who are dealing with this and how they are actually raising their communities. We came back, there's been a video done. They're beautiful photographs by these young photographers. And on my website, there is a documentary film that goes over the process. I believe this next image is a photograph, one of the beautiful pieces by Bridget and Eric Pipkin, and the sculptures would sit in front of these in the exhibit. I often move, when I have done a large body of work, and I mean physically large, I will then go back and revert to small work. So I go between small and large work for a reason. I feel like when I'm done with a large body of work, which is physically very exhausting and challenging, the small work pulls me into the power of the detail so that I don't lose track of that element. And so I went from Measure of My Strength to a group of small work called Sleight of Hand. And these are intended to be word games almost. They are a series of small hands and heads that are assembled to create and speak to a specific element of faith or an aspect of my life journey. And these objects were shown, much like my earlier smaller objects, these objects were shown in large groups. And they all contain parts of borrowed history and again are considered assemblages, but now are still figurative works. There are periods of time in the studio, and I imagine every artist could relate to this, where there is a need to be quiet and really sit and wait. And I had a period of about 3 years where I just really felt strongly that I was supposed to just gather emotionally and mentally from my work. I didn't feel I had an impetus for a body of work until after that point. And that next body of work that came out of that was a very interesting series of work with 6 figures referred to as lament. And they are based on biblical scripture and are directly connected to my faith in a very strong way. These are figures of personal devotion. And these are meant to be seen and used in a way for contemplation, but also as a journey. When people visit them, I expected them to move through them as a journey. Now, I understand, maybe it's the interpretive side of me, the importance of interpretation, but I understand that some abstract pieces are really hard to get a hold of. And I wanted to create work that anybody could move into. So to do that, I did something I'd never done before. I did write for Measure My Strength, but it went into a book and they were on huge panels. But for Lament, I created a book of poetry that literally had a poem for each piece in the series so that the visitor could go through and travel through it. But it gave them pegs word pegs to hold on to move into the imagery within the sculpture. Again, I always use salvage materials as a measure of a relationship to the redemptive element and what I believe is such a key element of my faith. That brings us to where I am today. And Amalgams, Heritage Anthology, was a unique experiment for me. Not too long ago, I, like many other people, went on the DNA heritage journey and found out some really interesting facts about my genetic heritage. And so I decided I needed to explore that with my work. And so I went back and looked for ancient stories related to those cultures from the places that I am from. I've been thinking a lot about things like cellular memory lately, how that impacts who we are and what we think and what we do. And how do our cultural stories, I work with organizations, Native Americans, in a way that is so rich with culture. And I've thought about those cultural stories and how powerful they are in shaping who we are. But it seemed to me that who we are is a combination of many things. It's not just our DNA and our heritage. It's not just our culture. It's also our environment. It's also our faith, our spiritual element. And so I tried to create a body of work that would somehow relate this as an amalgam, coming together. So these pieces are actually patterned after Oklahoma fauna and flora, because I live here. So I'm influenced, for instance, by the blackjacks and by, the prairie falcons. So you'll notice each of these pieces, whether bird or plant material, they are patterned, their design patterns are based on those Oklahoma connections. Their stories are ancient, and they found materials that are in them relate again to the consistency in my using salvage material as a reference to my faith. The bestiary images are also a part of amalgams, but these are mostly related to really significant, a significant part of my study in art history that I just love art history. And I was most fascinated by bestiary imagery, the use of animals to relate stories to laity that did not have the option of reading, could not read. So they would go under the portals of the churches and the portals in the buildings, and they would see these animals and they knew what they meant. And so bestiary images are really fascinating to me. And because I was using a lot of bird images in amalgams, I decided to look for bird images in some bestiaries. And I came upon these three bird images, the cardinal, the peacock, and the raven. And I decided to make them into the three stages of womanhood. So there's the young woman, the mother, and then the maiden. And so they seemed important to include in amalgams. Finally, my most recent work, and I'm actually still working on it, I just started this, is in the light of COVID. A couple of these works that you'll see in a minute are actually in a gallery that represents me, but I did want to put one into the show here. And these are challenges. These were challenges because we all felt locked down. And one of the things I know about being an artist is that I need to be able to have access. And when I'm shut down, it changes what I look at. And I generally always, when I feel a moment of closure, I always go to nature. And so I feel like the palette for these pieces and some of the imagery for these pieces are direct conversation that I had with nature, where I would sit back literally, and I refer to it as having an opportunity to be a voyeur, an interloper in a conversation or witnessing a conversation between nature and creator. The things that kept going when we seemed to stop. It was amazing to me how nature reacted to the fact that we weren't covering everything over with humanity. And I was so fascinated by the beauty of this. How could I tell stories that related to what people were dealing with? And so this one, I believe, is the butterfly. This one is in the exhibit here. And what's interesting that I want to share with you about this is that when I was working on this piece, I do a chemical force patina on my work. And I had created the infrastructure for this work. It was always meant to be a monarch. And it was going to be black. And I went into the studio after it had been forced, the chemical had done what it was supposed to do, and I was ready to stay it and slow it down. And I went in there and I realized that the chemical had caused the patina to bleed through the infrastructure. And that was so powerful for me. We know we had friends that were lost in COVID, and we heard story after story after story of people that were suffering through COVID. And I felt like I wasn't supposed to paint it black. I was supposed to leave it that way, which ironically had a sense of a bandage. When I first showed this piece, the response was fascinating, because the response was, this looks like lungs. And it was a butterfly. But in that amazing thing that can happen with art, there can be two very diametrically opposed ideas that collide, that create the most powerful, bigger idea, which is that in the middle of all of that, there was something that was happening that was going to bring us all through it. And so that piece has kind of taken on a life of its own. The next two pieces the next piece I have, I believe, is the piece these are two pieces that are in Montana. I'm sorry, I have them backwards. The first one is she's called COVID Blue, and she has the heart of the blue heart. This is the mother's heart. I thought about all the moms that were home teaching and how it was, they wore this heavy mantle, they had this need, how their hearts were probably breaking over the fact that they had all of this they needed to do to provide for their kids who were isolated. And then the other piece is really an interesting little take on Rip Van Winkle. And I thought about, all of us were just kind of suspended. We slept, sort of, kind of stopped in the middle of everything. And what happens to us when we move through that and we wake up on the other side? Are we different? Has it changed us? And again, I use the whole idea of the blackjack and this idea of the movement of time. So the three faces that come out of this are a reference to Rip Van Winkle, wisdom, and the coming of time. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. My work is not linear, it is circular. I hope it continues to be inspired by ideas and concepts that are surrounding me. I hope that it is something that you can enjoy and be a part of. And you can learn more about my work on my website at sunnimercer.com. And thank you for being supportive and encouraging of my work and engaging in my dialogue.
Thank you so much, Sunny. We do have a couple of questions, so I will go ahead and share those with you. We have someone, I believe this is asking about the blue, someone correct me if this is wrong, but I think this is someone asking about the blue heart from the In the Light of COVID series. And it says, is this layered leather? Where did the idea of scales come from?
Okay, the idea of the scales, which is interesting because actually the layers are more related to bird feathers than scales. And so I wanted to create a unique contrast in the design. And to do that, of course, the bottle caps, and they're all found bottle caps. Those bottle caps, when they're hammered and layered, give a different appearance, but really the reference is always to bird feathers. So that's why they're layered the way they are.
Great. And we had one more that came in as well, and it says, what artwork in your career has been the most fulfilling personally to complete?
You know, that's a really good question, but I have to say, in all honesty, it's the work that seams community together. It's work that brings more than one element. When my work can go outside of me, because it's really not about me. When it can go outside of me and it can do its own thing and it can bring people together and it can create new ideas or a new force, for me, that's amazing. And I have been very privileged to have had the opportunity to do that, you know, in Tag Ray and in Wichita, in Measure My Strength. Almost every body of work has at some point done that, but I would say that's my biggest, that's when I feel the work is most successful, when it moves outside of me.
That's great. It's very clear that so much of your work means something to you on a very personal level. Was there a series that was more difficult than the other for you to work through? I'm sure as just an individual you're trying to work through the materials as much as you are creating something. Was there a series that you struggled with creating?
There have been a couple. Physically, Tag Ray was absolutely challenging. And I will say that all of these larger sculptures are very challenging. There's not a single sculpture that doesn't have less than 1,000 nails in it. And that's physically very debilitating. Let me tell you about the most difficult exhibit I've ever done was the very first one. And I didn't share this at the beginning, but I'll share it. I think that sometimes what happens with an artist that really launches them into what's going to be their signature work is an event. And right before graduate school, my mother died. And I had a choice. And I went to graduate school as a painter, and I started to paint. But I found that I had moved outside of my capacity to paint from my gut. And I was painting I was just painting rote images out of newspapers and magazines. And I was running the risk of losing my place in graduate school, but I was grieving. And I wasn't sure how to process that. And so I was told I could take a hiatus and they would save my place, but I knew that I had made a commitment to my family to finish at a certain time and I was going to push through. So I went with my husband out to his family ranch out in Northwest Oklahoma that years ago the house had burned to the ground. And I went out there and I just sat for hours trying to figure out what am I trying to say and what am I going to do? And I started gathering all of these strange little pieces, old burnt bed springs and burnt dishes and silverware and pieces of glass. And I just created this whole box of stuff. And I brought it back to my studio and I decided, with the help of my mentors, that I need to set my brushes down. And I started making the medals. So I have to tell you, the very first medal was a medal that I made for my mother. She struggled with a very difficult disease. And I made that very first medal for her, and it was buried with her. And then they just poured out of me. So I would say, and they were hard, but I would say that was the most difficult, but that was pivotal in what had to happen in my work.
Thank you so much for sharing such a personal story with us. And it's very clear that you are a very talented painter, but your sculptures are just, you can see where your passion lies. And it's beautiful to see that come together. I did want to share with you that we had someone say thank you so much for sharing your artist story. You have inspired this individual in their work for many years, especially from their viewing of the Lament exhibit. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for being here with us today and continuing to put work out there. I know that as you continue to work on these, and like I said, you can tell they're all very personal for you, but it's very touching that you share that with the world around you and use that to bring our communities together. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you so much, Sunny, for giving us your time and sharing your stories with us. Reminder that this show is on display until August 21st, so please come down and see it. Additionally, you'll have the chance to talk with Sunny in person on Thursday, August 5th from 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock p.m. here at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame and Gaylord Pickens Museum. Thank you so much, everyone.